Hello and welcome to another episode of our Brothers Creed podcast, where we talk about motivation, experiences, and exploring the world around us. We're the Thomas Brothers, and I'm Jared.
And I'm Ethan, and today we have a couple guests with us. This is going to be a really good episode. We are collaborating today with the Virtuous Men podcast. So we're having them on, Jamie and Scott from the podcast. They talk about men in history and the attributes and the stories that they share about these men are just incredible. We talk about how we can become better through living virtuous life and learning from these virtuous men. So it's going to be a great journey. Let's get into it.
Let's jump in.
You can't climb the ladder of success with your hands in a pocket.
We will not go quietly into the night.
They tell me you're a man with true grit.
I am the one who knocks. Don't ever tell me what I can't do, ever!
That's how winning is done.
All right, we are here with Jamie and Scott from the Virtuous Men podcast. Thank you guys for joining us so much. Appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks for having us.
So I guess let me just kind of tell how I discovered you guys. I was on Instagram, just kind of scrolling through mindlessly, and I saw some of your posts on some of these great men. You guys have some great Instagram posts on great men, and then I was like, hey, these guys actually have a podcast. So I went and checked out one of your podcasts. I think the first episode that I listened to was on the name escapes me. It was with the guy who went to I think it was called Shackleton, Sir Ernest Shackleton.
Yeah, Ernest Shackleton.
And I was like the Arctic, and I was just captivated from the very first. I mean, the sound quality, the sound effects in you guys' podcast is so great, and so I was hooked. And I was like, we got to talk to these guys because you guys are kind of right along with what we do too. We do a lot of that as well.
Yeah, one of my first the podcast I listened to was one on Odysseus, and that's like one of my favorite stories.
Very good. You weren't put off to it in high school then. That's good.
No, there's just something about just like the adventure behind it that's, I'd rather read that than, I don't know, some of the other stuff they had us read in high school.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'll take that over Gatsby any day. Definitely.
Yes, exactly. So tell us about you guys. How did you guys start this? From when we were talking before, it sounds like you were already doing this a little bit beforehand. Tell us about your journey. Tell us about your background. Love to hear it.
Yeah, so I've kind of always had this passion for reaching men with a positive message of masculinity and of manhood. It seems like even more and more today, it's something that's kind of frowned upon, if not attacked entirely. Just this idea that manhood should be uplifted. And so that's always been a passion of mine. And I'm always been a student of history, especially kind of 1900s, early to mid 1900s, the world wars, Shackleton, Titanic, all of that stuff going on in history, just really interesting to me. And Scott and I met each other through a young adults group at a church we used to attend, and we became buddies. And I kind of shared this passion that I have with him, and he kind of had the same thing. He's like, "Yeah, we should do something," and we kind of put our heads together, and Virtuous Men is what came about of that. And so we started it in February of 2020 last year, and then. This year, February 2021, we were able to launch our podcast, season 1 of the podcast. So it was kind of a process of, okay, where is this going? Well, Instagram would be the easy first step, if you will. And we eventually wanted to expand to more media. And so, the podcast was the obvious next step. And we have other ideas of what's to come. And Scott, do you want to get in on that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, so, I mean, it was an interesting start because, when we both met each other, we both just really seemed to have this desire to reach men, particularly because, as Jamie was saying, it just seems that, you hear the term toxic masculinity all the time. And and men are just being given really bad messages about who they are. Like they're being told that who they are is essentially a bad thing. It's not necessarily phrased that way, but that's the message that is interpreted and received. And, we've read a lot of books about masculinity. We've read a lot of the same books. We were both heavily inspired by this one particular book. And we thought it would be great to do something like this. And when he suggested Instagram, I immediately was like, no way, social media, that's bad, because I'm not a social media guy at all. So when he said Instagram, I just kind of died a little inside. But
what book was it that you guys were inspired by? I'm curious.
It was it's called Mansfield's Book of Manly Men by Stephen Mansfield. He's written a number of books. He's written one about I think George W. Bush and Winston Churchill. I think he's written a couple books about Churchill, actually, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And we actually got the chance to interview him for the Churchill episode, which was a real thrill. You're interviewing someone who's not only knowledgeable on the man, but who has written the book that really inspired you to want to even do a project like that. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Actually, listen to that one as well. Yeah.
So, and I'm a writer. I wrote a book back in 2018 for Christian men, and I've loved to read. I love to write, and I'm an artist. So if you see, there are certain ones on our project where you can tell that it's probably Jamie's and then mine. Like if it's an artist, guaranteed it's probably mine. If it's a mountain climber or a president, it's probably Jamie's. But that's also what made the project so appealing, is because we both have different interests in a lot of ways, but those interests kind of complement each other. So between the two of us and who we're inspired by, we kind of get this full spectrum of men. So.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome that you guys complement each other and really you guys create a unique experience, and that people can learn about a variety of different things. The mountain climber, and then the artist. I think you guys probably did one on Michelangelo, Jamie, or that was probably you, Scott. And then the other one, Shackleton, was you, Jamie. That's cool. Jamie, I was gonna say, I was wondering if I heard on a podcast. I picked up on your accent on your podcast. Where is your accent from?
So I'm originally from Northern Ireland. I grew up there and then moved to the States when I was about 9 or 10. So it kind of, especially when I'm recording, I think it kind of comes out a little more. Uh-huh. And it's been corrupted over the years, but
I'm sure it has.
When I talk to family, from back home, it definitely comes out more. So I grew up kind of close to Belfast.
Oh, cool. Very cool. And are you guys both living in California now?
We're in Washington.
Or Washington. Okay.
We're about an hour away from Seattle, give or take.
Nice.
Yeah.
So when it originally started, and you guys kind of formulated this idea, two people get together and you talk through stuff. It's similar to how it happened with Jared and I. We were just sitting there and we were just talking, and then we were like, hey, we think we could benefit from this, but also we think other people could benefit from this as well. How do we reach those people? And that's kind of where a Brother's Creed grew from. So whenever you guys decided to take action and start doing these types of things, did you said it was February 2020, you started with some social medias, were there other platforms? How were you sharing these stories, or were you kind of building at that point and building some of these episodes and different things like that?
Well, actually Shackleton is a particularly special one, because that was our very first one that actually launched the project, because we're both enormous fans of Shackleton. Because every once in a while we'll come across a guy that we're both equally inspired by, so we have to fight in order who gets to do it. So kind of initially we started intending it to be strictly on Instagram. Mm-hmm. So because we like me, I have a passion for writing, so that just came naturally. And then we each kind of we're like, ooh, this man would be good for this particular virtue. Well, let's write a post about it. Or maybe we'll come across one that we both want to do, but then the other person, maybe they have more information, maybe they have more things to say, so then they get to do that. So there's kind of this back and forth that we do, but sometimes we'll text each other like, ooh, I thought of a perfect one for patience, or this guy would be great for a particular virtue somewhere down the road. And we kind of just keep a list of those things. So, but it's always been, before the podcast, it was strictly intended to be on Instagram.
Oh, Cool. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it was my idea initially to do it like, I don't know if you've looked at our Instagram in a while, but we have it kind of listed as questions. So who was he? What did he do? And how did he inspire?
Uh-huh.
And it was sort of my idea to do it that way, because I find that whenever I read certain things and it's kind of listed in a question format, I find that it's more engrossing.
Yeah.
And people's attention spans are, dwindling by the year, it seems. So if
Yes.
you can find anything you can use to hook them, that's what you want to do. And I find that questions can be a way to hook people. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Jamie.
Yeah, and as far as the podcast goes, it was sort of, it came about very organically, really. We wanted to eventually do a podcast, and what happened was we were thinking, okay, which one of these we'd probably done about 30, 35 or something at the time we started the podcast, going into the podcast, and we just started emailing people. We wanted to do it sort of tell a story, but also have an expert view and opinion of who this man was. And the first person we reached out to was Scott. Remind me of his name. I had to blank in me.
Martin Kemp.
Martin Kemp. Thank you.
Martin Kemp.
And so he's a world-renowned Leonardo da Vinci expert. And you're looking for people, and oh, this guy sounds good. And I had really no idea his credentials, like how big of a deal he was in the art world.
Yeah.
Scott obviously knew, but I didn't. I was ignorant at the time of that, and he got back to me right away and was like, "Hey, yeah, here's my assistant's info, and yeah, let's set something up." And this was April of last year, so it was right during all the lockdowns, and he wasn't doing much, and I had just been laid off from my job, and we were looking for stuff to do, and it was a perfect time to get the podcast going, and getting interviews was a really kind of foundational point where we understood, okay, well, we can just email these people we don't know and share with them what we want to do with this. And yeah, a lot of people said, yeah, sure, of course.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was surprising too, because like it was, I mean, you just don't think like, well, just shoot them an email and see what they say. Like the worst they can say is no. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I mean, there were some people that I wish would have said yes, but it's turned out pretty well.
Yeah, for sure. There's really something to be said, and that's kind of one thing that Jared and I love doing. Is there's something to be said about learning from the past, and just these past people. We talked about Shackleton and how he was an explorer, and he was a leader and a captain, and all these different types of things that were just did some amazing things, some amazingly difficult things as well. And Churchill and all these different historical figures, whether they be, I think even on the podcast you say, kind of fact or fiction, right? Some of these things might be questionable of did they really exist, but it really doesn't matter. What can we learn from them? And that's kind of what what our podcast is built around is experiences and exploration, and finding really what motivates people behind why do they act how they act? Why did they do what they did? I think there's just some people that in time of crisis or time of struggle or difficulty, that's really when I guess the true colors shine through, and you get an understanding of maybe the true understanding of the true power of a man or whoever it may be in those times of crisis. And so I just thought it was really cool. There's so much to learn from history.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and what I have found in researching this is that it's sort of the common thread that you see in every single one of these men is that they were flawed, because that's one thing, especially like in like learning history in school, like you get such simplistic descriptions of these people. Like you don't even really know who they were. It's just like, here's a list of their accomplishments, as in they never had to struggle. They never had to work. They never went through any kind of trouble to get where they got. But that is so completely not true. I mean, it's really a disservice to teach about these men in such a simplistic manner, because they were just as flawed and just as broken and hurt as we are.
Oh yeah.
And look at what they did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of times in history, you get the what, but you don't get the why. And I think the why is even more important in many cases.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And it's the same with fictional figures as well. Like, I think they're just as inspiring as historical figures, because some people, they don't like history. It's like, oh, history, no, that's boring. I learned that in school. Who needs that? So let's turn to fiction. Fiction is more interesting, but fiction can teach you, I think, just as much as history if you are open to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, I see, is that the Lady of the Lake knighting King Arthur in the background there of your...
That's actually a painting called The Accolade by Edmund Blair Leighton. It's considered, he painted a lot of Arthurian type images or chivalric images.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of my favorite paintings ever. It's a very inspiring piece of work.
Yeah, that one's really cool. I like that.
Yeah.
One of the things I actually wanted to share, I was listening to the Odysseus episode earlier today, and there's like a 30-second clip right at the beginning that I think that you guys do this every episode, where you guys kind of define virtue. And I was wondering if it would be okay if I played that real quick for our audience.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think
that's
you guys,
one of my episodes, so please do it.
Yes, you guys should be able to hear this, but I'll just play this. I think it's just excellent, and it just goes right in with our theme here. Here we go.
All right.
A virtue is a behavior one conforms to in order to achieve a moral and ethically principled life through action. A virtuous man is one who is well aware of how he falls short, yet chooses not to allow his flaws to define him as he seeks to better himself. Such men show that it is possible to overcome the things that keep us from achieving our destinies. Though each man is flawed and imperfect, it is in the lives of flawed men that we see the possibility for virtue in our own lives.
So that was the clip.
Epic.
Yeah.
I'll just say the music in the background and
totally epic. I love that part where you guys talk about virtue as a moral or ethically principled life, through action, is that the action must be applied. And then you go in and then talk about how not everybody's perfect, and we're not perfect, but by learning from these men in the past, we can learn how to overcome those imperfections to be the best men that we can be. And I think that's such a great message for anybody, men or women right now, that, you don't have to be perfect. I think perfectionism is such a cancer that it could make you just have such paralysis in your life. But if you realize I'm going to make mistakes and I just have to keep going, I feel like that's really inspirational. I love that you guys say that. That's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Scott. I was just going to say, you kind of get two sides of the coin. You either have this view of history where you think, oh, these people were perfect. They were, faultless, flawless people who did these amazing things. And then the other side of the coin of, oh, well, did you know they blank, and as if that just takes it all away. Like any kind of virtue they exemplified in their life is just taken away by these one or two flaws, or maybe a big flaw. But what we try to put forth in our episodes and our Instagram is, yes, these men were flawed. Yes, they had faults, but look what they were still able to accomplish. And hey, guess what? You and I, we're certainly not perfect either, but we can also overcome that.
Definitely.
Yeah, very true. Well, and like what you were saying, just about action, that's really the key. That's another thing that runs through all the men that we talk about, is that they acted. They didn't, like when you were saying that, the first person that came to mind was one that we did. It was Horatio Spafford. And he was the Presbyterian lawyer who lost all 4 of his daughters in a boat accident or a ship accident. I mean, How many of us have ever dealt with that kind of grief? If he had spent the rest of his life in grief and sorrow, no one would have blamed him.
Yeah.
But what did he do? He wrote a song, and the song's one of the most well-known hymns of all time, So that seems like a very simple act, but look at what happened, he didn't just wallow in it. He acted on it.
Absolutely.
By the simplest of actions, just by writing a song, he overcame his sorrow.
Yeah. Hey guys, just wanted to take a quick break and say thank you for listening today and invite you to support us on Patreon. As a loyalist supporter, you get access to 2 additional episodes per month, which are not released publicly. You can find the link to our Patreon page in the episode description. Let's get back to the show.
There's a saying, and I think I've shared this before, but there's a saying that says a smart man learns from his own mistakes, and a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. You know, I think that's really impactful, and that's something that I have, philosophy I've tried to live by in my life. And sometimes I have been the smart man, and sometimes I've been the wise man.
Sometimes you've been a dumb man too. I just put that out there.
Me
too, though.
Yeah, sometimes
we're all flawed here. We're all flawed.
Sometimes the person that makes the mistakes, you don't learn anything from them. Yeah, that's the dumb man. But I worked with this guy, and this just popped into my head while we were talking. I worked with this guy, and he would always say that one oh crap cancels out 100 attaboys, which kind of means it's kind of confusing, but like one mistake, right, can have a sense of canceling out 100 good jobs or good things you did. And so I think what we were talking about men that make mistakes and everything, and I think it's kind of a principle of averages, right? We're gonna make mistakes, and we're gonna have successes and wins and accomplishments that go along with those. And I think that with the averages, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have more on the positive side than on the negative side. And then, if we can share that legacy with those that come behind us, whether it be family members or listeners or children or, whoever is participating in that, then it will hopefully effectively grow what their path will be. And that averages of success over failure is going to be positive for them, and they can kind of move past some of these things. I'm sure that if you were to talk to any of these people that you guys have researched on, or Jared and I have talked about, I'm pretty sure if they knew that 100 years from now they would be like these massive characters, they would probably be extremely humbled. They'd be like, "You're talking about me?" But I'm not that I'm a nobody, but why are you talking about me? And so I think it's kind of interesting to think, what am I doing to help effectively get me to my goals, to potentially in 100 years from now somebody's going to say, write a biography on Ethan Thomas and the accomplishments that he made towards society and everything else. And I have no idea, but it's gonna be a short book.
Oh yeah,
right.
That's a really good point too. Like, as you were talking about that, because that's something that I often think about to myself is like, what kind of the people of our generation, like, who's going to write biographies about them? Just you think of our generation and how how broken and stuck we are in our ways, and we're so obsessed with the self in so many ways.
Yeah,
these men, a lot of these men were self-absorbed, but they were still able to accomplish great things. But for us, it's more just comfort and ease and having a simple life where you don't have to work too hard, you don't have to be stretched out of your comfort zone. And like you said, like there's no legacy in that. Like when you die, it'll be as if you never existed.
Yeah.
It's like, as men, do we want that for ourselves? Like, I don't.
Yeah,
absolutely. In 100 years, it's going to be the Chronicles of Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. or like. Or
have you guys seen that picture on that meme on Instagram? And it's like here's a picture of, it's like 50 years from now, it's like, here's a picture of your grandpa, and it's like some teenage kid with like purple hair and like all these earrings and stuff. And it's like, here's a picture of my grandpa today, and it's like some guy on D-Day,
Oh God. It's like, well, I'm actually glad I haven't seen that now that you describe it. So I feel better now.
But
you were talking about what would they say? What these men of the past, people of the past, what would they say if they could be transported to our time and the way we talk about them? Like, I think of Shackleton. What would he say if the main reason that people still know him was his biggest failure? That expedition was a failure from start to finish, but people remember it because of what they accomplished in surviving and getting out of that situation by themselves. They didn't have GPS to call search and rescue to come pick them up. no one knew where they were for years.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's just amazing that things that, we can apply that to ourselves of times in our lives when we think, wow, this is my worst possible moment. But instead of thinking of that, you can turn that around and say, okay, yeah, this is bad, but if I come out of this, it could end up being one of the greatest moments in my life. And, Churchill talked to that idea as well of, I can't tell you the exact quote, but in essence, it's, the pessimist only sees what bad can come out of the situation. The optimist takes the bad situation and sees what good can come out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that mindset shift that I think separates the men we remember and the men we don't.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and like what you were saying, Jamie, like it kind of made me think of this whole idea that, this whole question of, well, what do you allow to define you? And for men of our generation, a lot of them are defined by the culture. And what does the culture say? The culture says your masculinity is toxic. So they take that and they say, well, society says it, so it must be true. Or there are men who they take their cues from women, and women don't seem to have a high opinion of them, or they listen to feminism and the ideology that comes with that, and they say, well, it must be true because a lot of women are saying it. It's like, really?
Yeah.
You're gonna let that define you?
I think it's.
Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And it speaks to the whole like fatherlessness issue that is so prevalent, because so many of these men of our generation never had a father or a stable father figure. And
yeah,
so, it's like, it's sad, but it's not that shocking.
Yeah. I mean, really when it comes down to, in my mind, masculinity or whatever, what that term means to me is just like being a good man, being a good father. You look at all the statistics around kids who are raised in homes where there is no father influence. I'm a data guy. I work in data. I have my degree in data science, so that's what I know. And when I see this statistics that say that, it's like, well, I already know that, but then it's just like extra proof. It's like, yeah, you need a father figure in these kids' lives, and my goal is to be the best dad that I can be. I have 4 kids. Ethan's got 4 kids, so we got a whole gaggle of kids over here that we're trying to raise together. And, it's not easy. And so I'm trying to teach my kids to be resilient, to be strong. I have all boys, so that makes it a little bit unique. Ethan does have a girl, though, so we have some tenderness in our...
Something to soften up everything.
Yeah. Well, now we know who to do for the virtue of tenderness. So
yeah, there you go.
But, yeah, totally agree with you. It's just men are so important, and we have to build each other up, and that's why I loved your podcast. One of the things I wanted to get into here was I had asked each of you to kind of maybe come with a story about someone historically that you've admired or maybe that you've shared on your podcast. Would love to hear from each of you about one of your stories that you brought to share with us, and give us maybe a taste of what your podcast is like.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a tough one, because I'm inspired by every single person we've ever done, even the ones that I never heard of, that Jamie brought to the table. I think let's see. So from our Instagram project, there is one that particularly stands out, and it was kind of the one that jumped out to me whenever I was reading the questions that we were going to be asked. And we haven't done a podcast on this one, so if you'd still like, I could talk about that one, even though we haven't done a podcast.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Any of the people that you've researched.
Yeah. So I don't know if either of you are familiar with the Green River Killer.
No.
He was a prolific serial killer in the state of Washington, which is one of many, sadly. I don't know what it is about Washington and killers, but
it's all the rain.
But yeah. But this particular killer, just as nasty as you could get. He confessed to killing 48 women, and probably even more than that. And some of them were as young as 16 or 15.
Wow.
And he was also a necrophile. So it's just as nasty as you could possibly get. And he was eventually apprehended. And in order to avoid the death penalty, he offered to help find the bodies, or the ones that he was able to locate, because he had done it for so long that even he didn't know where they were a lot of the time. And there came a point during his trial where he was given the chance to sit in a courtroom and hear from the family members or the friends of the victims. And one by one, they just kind of came and they spoke to him. And a vast majority of them said exactly what you would expect, just nothing but hatred, bile, anger, poison, rage, just all of that. And many of them said, I hope you rot in hell. I hope you spend eternity having done to you what you did to them, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he just was emotionless. It's like he expected it. He was kind of just nodding and, okay, yeah, I understand. Great. And then this man comes up and he was, and I don't know what his actual occupation was, but he was a part-time mall store Santa Claus, and he looks the figure entirely. He's got the beard, he's got the hair, and he just comes up and he says, there's a lot of people here that hate you, and I'm not one of them. And you've made it very hard for me to hold up to what I believe, and that's what God says to do, and that's to forgive, and you're forgiven. And the killer just broke down and wept. And I did, as I watched the footage of that, as I was researching it, I just was, I was pretty overwhelmed. I'm even talking about it now, I'm kind of getting a little,
wow.
But I just couldn't believe that someone could do that. Like, put yourself in his shoes. I mean, would you be able to forgive? Would you be able to do that? And I just was very, very affected. I still am. It's probably the most affected I've ever been by a post that we've done or a podcast episode that we've done. But like, I mean, what an example of forgiveness, like,
oh yeah.
It's, and I stay on the post at the end where he was faced with humanity at the absolute worst, but he showed the world humanity at its best.
I love that.
So,
yeah, and his name is Robert Rule, correct?
Yeah, Robert Rule was his name. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, we did an episode on, I think it was forgiveness, right? Or anger.
Yeah, it was a Patreon, a loyalist episode.
And we talked about how, at the Christ Emmanuel shooting in the Charleston area, I live in South Carolina. Ethan lives in North Carolina. We basically live in the same area. And there was a shooting at this black church, I think it's a Baptist church there. But and when this guy was on trial, I think it was Dylan Roof, everybody came up and just forgave him. The overwhelming majority just forgave him. And I shared some quotes about how one of the guys said, my mom would have wanted me to just move on and just forgive this guy and, just move on with life and not hold on to the anger. One of my favorite quotes about anger is just like, being angry or vengeful is like drinking poison and wanting the other person to die. And so
right.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
That's such an inspiring story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, and it was funny too, because I remembered that story from high school. So it was one of those things where like my teacher spoke about it and I just kind of forgot about it, but it just was kind of one of those memories that gets tucked away in the back somewhere. And as we were doing the project, I thought it just hit me like, we got to do this guy.
Oh yeah.
You can't get like, I mean, I'm not a parent. I'm a single man, never been married, don't have kids, but as a parent, I just can't imagine being in that position and still being able to forgive. Like, I mean, it's like it was easy. We have to do a post on this guy.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
It would be very difficult for sure.
And it's easy to forgive when people haven't offended you very much. And that's not what Christ taught, It's for those times where it's actually difficult. That's where we're supposed to truly apply those teachings.
Yeah.
Very true. Jamie, tell us, brother, what do you got?
I kind of had two. One that we've done an Instagram post about, and another one we've done the podcast already. It's a guy by the name of Richard Wurmbrand. Richard Wurmbrand was he lived during World War II and into the Cold War in Romania. And when the Nazis came into Romania and occupied the country, he still tried to share the gospel with even Nazi soldiers, even though that was heavily persecuted. And that was kind of his. I mean, he was imprisoned. His wife was in prison. They were tortured, beaten. And then when the Soviets came into Romania, and Romania was under communist rule, it was even heavier persecution. It was he was imprisoned for, I believe, 14 years and constantly tortured, and purely because he was sharing the gospel with Romanians and even with communist soldiers, with Russian soldiers. And he came out of prison. He was basically unable to walk because his feet had been beaten so badly that he couldn't even wear shoes. And he came out of prison before going back into prison again for preaching the gospel. He came out of prison for preaching. He came out and continued to preach to the very people who were persecuting him. And I think that's probably one of the best examples I can think of loving your enemy, because when we think of sharing our faith with people, it's often we think of, well, people who might want to hear that, or people who may need to hear that. But he was preaching to people who distinctly were persecuting him because of his faith, and he still chose to share with them what he felt was his duty to share. So we're actually going to be doing a podcast episode on him for season 2. So stay tuned for that one. That will be a really interesting one.
Oh yeah,
and we're looking forward to that one. My other is, of course, Shackleton. He's definitely one of my heroes. Just we've already talked quite a bit. I won't talk too much more about him, but just the fact that he was able to lead his men in the way that he did, and that they all survived. I mean, every single one of them survived. There was one guy had a heart attack. One guy, they were frostbitten. They were demoralized, but he still kept them together enough to keep them alive and rescue themselves.
And he was trying to get to the South Pole, correct?
Yeah, he was trying to get to he's actually trying to go across the continent of Antarctica from the Argentina side to the New Zealand side, straight across.
Wow.
So that was his plan, and yeah, obviously it went awry. But one part of the episode that we say at the end that I really think kind of encapsulates him is his leadership style was a servant leader. He very much, he wouldn't ask his men to do something unless he were willing to do that himself. He's not just going to send them out there and say, hey, you guys do the grunt work. He got in there. He made sure he led by example, but he was also a man's man, and he earned their respect. He didn't just command it. He earned it first. And so I think of all the, leadership books you can possibly read. There's, probably tens of thousands of leadership books, but I think if anyone wants to be a leader, whether it be, in their home, at work, at church, wherever, reading that story of Shackleton, he has an audio or a biography he wrote called South, which is what we read from in the episode. That's his firsthand account of the expedition. And also Alfred Lansing's Endurance is like a kind of more of a theatrical version of the events, but very, very good story. It covers it so well and puts you, right in the time period in which it took place.
I think one underlying maybe quality or attribute that all of these men have is grit. It's just something that's just this willpower to overcome, whether it's overcoming sadness in the story that Scott shared, or overcoming physical trials, whether it's persecution or being beaten, or overcoming an expedition that seemed like a failure. And it's just all these people have grit and the desire to keep moving forward. I think that's huge. So one other question we had was, how has researching these men and listening to these stories and reading, how has that inspired you guys in your own lives? I mean, what have you taken away from these virtuous men, and what have you applied in your lives as a result of this research?
Well, I think for each of us, there are ones that strike a deeper chord. I think, just given the kind of guys that we are, like there are some that really speak to me and some that really speak to Jamie. But I think, where was I going with that thought? Wow. right out the ear.
No, I totally agree with you. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
to each one of us, there's, and like with us, like when we research something, I'm like, oh man, that guy was so inspirational to me. And like with you, you're the artist, right? And so, you know, when you look at Michelangelo, you're like, man, like he's like the quintessential Renaissance man. And how can I use my genius to like do more than I'm doing now? I mean, like that's kind of like what I feel like sometimes when I research these guys, and I imagine you guys probably feel the same, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, and I've told Jamie this before, that I feel like this project is more for me than the guys that we're trying to reach, you know, because I mean, I can't even tell you, it's probably every week, not a week goes by where I don't read at least one or two of the posts that we've written in the past. And it is inspiring. You can't help but be inspired. Like, you're just looking at these men, whether they were fictional or real, you can't help but look at their example and think, like, there is a higher way than what you're living now. Like, there is more to life than what you're doing now. And it's what these guys did. So I mean, yeah. So like, it's just going back and looking through all of them, really, like whether I wrote them or Jamie wrote them. It's just, I really enjoy going back and looking over them and just being like, wow, like these were, and kind of like what you were saying, where, you know, 100 years, if these men were alive today and saw what kind of legacies they left, they would probably be shocked. I totally agree completely.
I love it.
And
yeah, I think for me, I agree with Scott. It's something I can, especially the podcast. I love going back and listening to it, and not just to listen to my own voice. I would never do that, but it's just hearing the stories again, and you know, we know the effort that kind of goes into making the episodes. You know, you guys know it takes a lot of effort to make a podcast and make episodes and make a good quality. And I think it's a treat to do that, because you're kind of in a way honoring this person of history that you admire. And also, you know, my wife's very supportive of this project. She listens to the episodes, she shares them with people, and I have a 3-year-old daughter, and the other day she said something to me in the effect of, "Daddy, let's do a kids Virtuous Man." She wanted us to do like a kids book or something. We were reading a book, and she's like, "Let's do kids Virtuous Man." So she's like, "Yeah, like years are turning. But what if we did like a kids book with Virtuous Man?" Like, and she's 3. So, you know, it gets me thinking, you know, what else can we do with this project to reach more people and reach a greater audience? And Scott's talked for a long time, and he's the writer of the two of us, and we've talked about, you know, what if we did a book, or even a devotion for men centered around these virtuous men, something like that, to reach a greater audience. So it's inspiring for us to learn about these guys, but also inspiring, and it gives us a lot of thoughts for the future of what does this project hold in the coming years. So we're really excited for it.
And it's also really inspiring too, and Jamie, you'd probably agree, where I find that one thing for me as I research these men, and especially in the podcast episodes, because you really have to go in depth on that, because there's a lot of research that goes into that. But I constantly find myself asking, what would I do in their shoes? Like in this particular situation? Because it seems that with all of the men that we do, there were certain situations they were in that were tougher than what we would normally think of. And maybe we've experienced that in our own lives, but either way, they all face hardship. So that's one thing that I often think about constantly, whether I'm researching or reading them again, is what would I do? Like, would I be able to do what they did? So it's kind of like, it's inspiring just, and even just looking at their pictures, I find too, that's also inspiring too, for some reason. Like, it's like a hall of fame kind of these great men of great virtue. And you think, could I ever be added on that list somehow?
Could I pull off that haircut?
It really makes you think. It makes you ask questions about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. You know, I really love that. And I think I'm really excited about what you guys are doing. And obviously, you know, want to keep in touch with you guys and track what you're doing and be involved if we can at all possible, and what you guys got going on in the future. And would love to, show our audience that as well, because I'm sure that they would love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we totally, and we've talked about this before, like we really believe in supporting the work of people that do the same thing that we do. Because the way I look at it, we're all on the same team. We're all in this together. I mean, that's an overused COVID-19 phrase, but it is true. So, I mean, we're all men here. We're all in the fight together. So we should be supporting each other and building one another up and staying in touch.
Absolutely. Well, we kind of have, towards the end of our podcast, we always ask our guests if they could share a piece of their personal creed with us. Now, a creed is a set of principles or virtues that guide the way that you act in your life, whether that be a mantra or a quote or some life advice. So I'd love to hear some of your personal creed, Scott and Jamie, if you could share that with us.
Well, Jamie, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
So I'll stay kind of on the theme of our podcast, stay on the theme of history. Especially in today's age, I think we tend to overlook history. And my advice would be to not overlook, to not denigrate the past and think that we're, the best generation ever to live, the most enlightened there's ever been, because I don't think that's true. And we may be the most technologically advanced civilization there's ever been, but that doesn't mean that we're the most virtuous. It doesn't mean we're certainly not the most satisfied. I don't think we're the most morally grounded either. And so, we kind of cover this in one of the episodes in particular in season 2 of the podcast. I won't give any spoilers, but we cover the point that, if we are to learn from the past, we can't just dismiss everyone in the past as, they are fill in the blank, and that just completely disregards anything they were to accomplish or contribute to society. And one of my favorite quotes is from the book of Job. It says, wisdom is with the aged and understanding in length of days. And I think we'd really do well to remember that, not just to think that we have it all together, that we know everything because we can, simply type it into Google and have the answer.
Yeah.
To seek out wisdom from generations past and to use that in the future and present.
Great. Love that. Thank you so much, Jamie. Appreciate that.
Good words, brother.
Indeed.
Oh yeah. For me, there's so many pieces of wisdom that I hold dear. There's many from the Bible. There's probably too many from the Bible to count, but there's one quote from a film that I really love. It's The Last Samurai. I'm sure you guys have seen that at some point.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Actually, we did an episode on samurais.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so did we. Well, not an episode, but a post on the 47 Ronin. So yeah, that was a good one.
That's awesome.
But so there's a quote in that film that I have always loved from the first time I saw that movie. I must have been in high school at the time, but it's a quote that always stayed with me. And if you recall, and I carry it in my wallet. I occasionally have a couple things like that I just carry around with me so that I can always be reminded and have that close. But so if you don't mind, I could just read a quote from. So this is after he's been in the samurai village for a while. He's been taken captive and he's gotten over his alcoholism and he's kind of just had time to reflect and to see their way of life. So this is just a quote from his journal. So here we go. 1876, day unknown, month unknown. I continue to live among these unusual people. I'm their captive and I cannot escape. Mostly I'm treated with a mild neglect, as if I were a stray dog or an unwelcome guest. Everyone is polite. Everyone smiles and bows. Yet beneath their courtesy, I detect a deep reservoir of feeling. They are an intriguing people. From the moment they wake, they devote themselves to the perfection of whatever they pursue. I have never seen such discipline. It's that final part that has always stayed with me is from the moment they wake, they devote themselves to the perfection of whatever they pursue. Mm-hmm. So as men, I would say, what should we be pursuing? It should be virtue. all the virtues that we've talked about. Like, what if you devoted your life to that instead of being entertained or getting likes on social media or just living for yourself? What if you put all that aside and sought to seek perfection of virtue? So that's something that I always try to remind myself of as often as I can.
I really like that. I think just doing the best at what you can do. I mean, there's so much satisfaction in that. And even if it's a menial job, I mean, just doing it the right way. And love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's kind of a cool quote.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been great. When can the listeners expect season 2?
Yeah.
Good question. We don't have an exact date yet, but it will be this summer.
Okay. All right. So
of this year too.
Of this year.
Of this year.
Okay.
summer 2021.
Yeah. It's pretty time consuming, but let's just say that we have some very, very good episodes coming up, and some good stuff coming along after season 2 that's going to be really exciting. So we're very excited for the rest of the year.
Now, how many you guys do? About 6 episodes per season, is that right? Or how many episodes you got?
5 or 6, give or take. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, where can our listeners find you guys?
So if you go to Instagram, it's Virtuous Men. If you just type in Virtuous Men, you should find us. There's a black logo you should look for. And on Apple Podcast and Spotify, just type in Virtuous Men Podcast.
Great.
Yeah, it's Virtuous Men. There's another one called Virtuous Man. It's not that one. This is the Virtuous Men.
Oh my.
Men.
So and it's a black logo with headphones, and we'll put links to you guys' Instagram and your podcast in our show notes so that people can go to the right one. So if you in the show for those who don't know what show notes are, in the show description, each episode has a description. If you scroll down, you can see the links, and you can click on those, and you can go check out their episodes. So
excellent.
Appreciate it, guys.
And do you guys have a YouTube channel or anything like that?
We don't, but we have talked about like we talked about earlier. Like we've talked about a lot this year about branching off into other media, and YouTube was a natural one that we want to expand to. So we still don't quite know how that works, but we absolutely would love to do that at some point.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been great. So many stories and so many attributes and things that we can strive to better ourselves and to better our creed. So for our listeners out there, you can follow us on Instagram at a.brothers.creed, all podcast platforms as well as YouTube if you want to see this, see the video of this episode. So,
and we'll be posting. We post the reels on. We're actually Ethan's our TikTok guy now. So we've been posting some clips and stuff on TikTok, and I do the kind of the Instagram game. So we're blasting on all fronts here.
Yeah. So check it out.
It's nice to know that there is something on TikTok that isn't totally morally bankrupt. So that's great.
Yes, and it's
that's good to know. That's good to know that TikTok isn't a total wasteland.
Yeah, and it is at a.brothers.creed. Go there and you can find all the good stuff. So,
that's right.
Thank you, Scott and Jamie, for your time, and everybody else for listening. Please comment, subscribe, and leave us a like, and let's build that creed together.
Let's do it. Thanks, guys.
You bet.
All right, cheers, guys.